This session is about a project that AAC&U has been underway with for about 3 years now, I guess. And the funding has come from our good colleagues at the Lumina Foundation. And it is around a couple different things. Carol, I mentioned earlier, and you've heard about the degree qualifications profile, which looks like this, the new improved version of it, the not the beta, but the next one, 2.0. And there will be some in the back. If you don't have one, you can get them free from Lumina. But we also have a few here. It is a roadmap, really, for the kinds of learning outcomes that LEAP is about and that you've heard about, that students need regardless of the degree that they're seeking, regardless of the institution that they're going to. And part of this project was really about, could this framework of learning outcomes that students need, that faculty and other educational professionals have been saying that our students need, that we're trying to help them develop and learn during the time that they're with us, could that framework be used at levels of demonstrated learning for an associate degree, a baccalaureate degree, and a master's degree, and be actually used by institutions to help them plan, look at, put together their courses of study and what the work was that they were doing on their campuses with students. But in particular for this project, it also included, could it be used to help facilitate student transfer? Because so many of our students, such a large proportion of our students, attend more than one institution. The bulk of those going and moving between and among 2-year and 4-year institutions, but just in general, could it be used for that purpose, and could it be a way for students to port their learning around these outcomes that may or may not be reflected in a set of courses and course numbers and grades that they're also porting with them? How could it be used? How might it be used? What usefulness might it be? And so we're a panel of white guys up here. Just by circumstance, it turned out these folks were both good and available. And I'm sorry, guys.
Emphasis.
I know.
But tragically,
available was the important part. That some of my first choices simply weren't available. I'm sorry. It's getting later in the day, isn't it? Yeah. But anyway, we have Ken O'Donnell from Cal State University System, David Hubert from Salt Lake Community College, and Tom Steen from North Dakota. And they're each going to introduce themselves. What I'm going to do is give you a little bit of an overview of the project. I'm going to try to go through that fairly quickly, because I will also be, what you have here, and we'll return to it later, is the URL for our website at AAC&U, and there's a whole lot more information there that you can go to. But this is to give you an overview and an insight into how some of the participants in the project had used it and found it useful. The project actually tried to bring together a whole set of things that were already happening out there. The AAC&U LEAP outcomes, the degree profile, which is over there on the left, the DQP, the essential learning outcomes, tuning, which, how many of you are familiar with tuning? Okay, it's sort of like the DQP for the majors that included inviting folks in the major field to faculty, students, employers to come together and kind of define what were the necessary areas of learning within each of those. And in the value rubrics as another part of this project. And then we introduced the quality collaboratives, which is our current project. And I'm thanking Dan McInerney, who just came in, for this graphic, because we keep using it all the time because it's pretty cool. And one of the things that did happen in Utah was they said, we have got all this stuff going on. How do we make sense of it? How do we have any time to actually do this? Every time you come up with a new acronym or a new program, our faculty just say, oh, not one more thing. And we said, well, we need you to start thinking about it differently. It's not about each new thing, but actually these are all parts of what the work is that we're really about. And so the challenge is to help our faculty and our colleagues begin to see this as a whole. And so, again, I'm still using Dan's stuff here, which is what AAC&U does, okay? We find out all the good stuff you're doing out there and how you're doing it, and we try to take it and share it with everybody else, okay? So he put it in the context of these kinds of questions, which I think is a nice way to enter into almost all kinds of things that we do, is by posing it as a response to a question that's out there. So what should post-secondary education aim to achieve? Well, we have a certain bias here. It's LEAP, okay? That's the answer to that. What qualities should students develop in the post-secondary education? The essential learning outcomes. What qualities do educators develop at different degree levels? Well, that's what the DQP is doing, is taking those things and putting them in the context of the currency in higher education of degrees. What should students' majors aim to achieve? Tuning is the way in which several disciplines have been able to enter into that and to help define it and clarify it and find all the things that are shared across institutions, et cetera. What is the one way of determining if we are, one way, not the way, but one way of achieving our goals? Well, the value rubrics that are indeed developmental, they are for the arc of learning across these different things over time, across degrees, is one of the ways that we can indeed begin to see whether students are achieving it and at what levels. And then what can we do to facilitate transfer and mobility? And the quality collaboratives is what we're engaged in to try to respond to that question. So this is essentially what the quality collaboratives is. It was a partnership of 2- and 4-year institutions in, it was 20 campuses over 9 participating states. 2 states, Oregon and North Dakota, participated at the state level, and they didn't have individual campuses, partners, 2- and 4-year partner institutions in those states participating. The other 7 states had 2- and 4-year partnerships that had arisen, where many of the students at a single 2-year institution were transferring to a single 4-year institution, okay? And so it was, well, let's look at those. They already have established patterns of transfer. They already have mechanisms and people who know each other. Let's start where there's already a basis to work from. And that was sort of the mantra for the entire project and for all of the institutions and all of the states. Start with what you've already got going on, and then let's see if this, the DQP, can be useful in trying to pull those things together. But it was all about the quality of the student learning and the ability of it to be portable or transferable from place to place. There were 3 strands of work in the project that we ask all of the dyads, what we call dyads, those 2- and 4-year partnership institutions, as well as the states, to look at this from the standpoint of assessment, assessing the quality of the learning that was there, not just counting the credit hours and the courses, but could they look at the quality of that learning and in a transportable way? What were the policy implications if you did want to take the DQP and you're putting it into and trying to connect it to what's already in existence? What are the policy implications there for changes that would have to occur, or what can you do with all of this within those policies that already exist? And then the 3rd strand was faculty leadership and development. And again, as with most of the work that AAC&U does, we firmly believe that none of this happens without faculty leadership and faculty engagement with it, especially if you want it to continue beyond a funded project. And so we really looked at these kinds of things. So we did take the Lumina degree profile, and again, I think most of you have some familiarities with it, so I'm going to go through it relatively briefly, and as I said, the publication's in the back. But it's about those framework for those competencies required for attaining a degree. It indicates or identifies 5 areas: specialized knowledge, i.e. a lot of what we associate with the major, the broad integrative, much of what we associate with general education in traditional parlance, intellectual skills, the written communication and those kinds of things. And then because you find those things wherever you find something called the degree profile or the degree framework. This notion came from Europe, from the European Union, and that grew out of things that they imported from the United States. They messed around with it and developed it further, and we re-imported it here as the degree qualifications profile. But when it came here, we actually said, but what about it in the American context is different? And there were two things that popped up almost immediately for those who were putting together the DQP. And they said one of it is applied learning, that there's a much heavier emphasis in the United States that is pretty much absent when we look at what's happening in the European Union with their degree qualifications frameworks, of the application of the knowledge in a real-world context, in multiple settings, and so on and so forth. And then the last part of it was civic learning. That in the United States there is so much of a foundation here about the role of higher education and the degree as part of our civic education, as was addressed this morning. And so those two dimensions were added into it for the DQP. This is a very inelegant demonstration of it, but it essentially has your intellectual skills down the left-hand side with the specialized, broad, applied, collaborative learning, and civic across the top. And the notion here is that whether you're looking at specialized, broad, the applied, collaborative, or the civic, all of those intellectual skills have to be happening as well. Okay, and so they're cross-cutting things here regardless of what category you're looking at, and that these are indeed developed in all of those arenas. They have to be there for all of those parts of the learning to be occurring at increasingly more sophisticated levels. This is another way of illustrating it. I particularly like this. A lot of people don't, but I do. But it sort of shows that the associate degree is nested within the baccalaureate, within the master's. All the dimensions of learning stay the same regardless of the degree level, and as do the 5 areas of learning, but you get higher expectations for the quality of the learning that's demonstrated at each of those degree levels, okay? And it also allows for you to take that pentagram and stretch it in different ways too, in terms of an emphasis that you may have more on specialized knowledge or civic learning or whatever it happens to be. So it does encompass the 3 degree levels and all 5 areas of learning. And those 5 areas are not indeed separate, they are interrelated. And again, the knowledge, intellectual skills are integrated in the context of application, whether it's research, field-based projects, civic problem solving. Very much a high-impact, engaged learning framework. These are the states that existed from coast to coast. In California, Utah, Wisconsin, Indiana, Kentucky, Virginia, and Massachusetts, there were 2- and 4-year institutions participating. Some of those folks are in this room, and I appreciate them coming and being here. The Hewlett Foundation also helped fund this project along with Lumina. These are the actual institutions in those states that participated, so that you can see if your institution was there and you didn't even know it, or whether some of your sister institutions were there. And then we did have North Dakota, which was a unique participant in that they already had an established general education council, and I'm stealing one of your slides here, Tom,
Okay.
of 11 public campuses, 5 tribal colleges, and 3 private colleges and universities that were already working with state policy, state-mandated general education requirements and things. They were already set up there. And again, our mantra was work with where you are, work with what you have and see what you can do with that to move it to another level. And that's exactly what they did, encompassing all of the campuses in their state in various ways. And then the Oregon University system did a similar kind of thing. It also occurred during this time period that they disbanded the Oregon University system and put a new structure in place for the state. But in the meantime, they had all these institutions that were working and had been working on this stuff, and they just continued to work on it. And so it was a kind of interesting case study of how the structure at the state level disappeared and got reconfigured, but the work on the campuses really supporting the fact that that's where the work has to be done and that's where people have to be engaged. And if they are, they'll do the work and they'll continue it, regardless of all the trappings that may be out there. So what did those institutions do? And again, I didn't identify the particular campuses, but I'm listing a whole set of things here that I don't expect you to read, but to give you a suggestion of the range of things that happen. Many of them dealt with institutional learning outcomes and then connected them to the DQP, trying to look at different outcomes. So quantitative literacy was one of those that some folks focused on. And they looked at it in different disciplines. Some went to the general education arena and looked at what happens in general education in terms of those outcomes and how this could be used. Tuning was one of the things that some of the states and some of the dyads had been doing, and so they built off of the tuning work that had been done to see how that could be fleshed out for the entire degree program that was there. Again, each of these we have more information about on our website, and you can actually see which of the institutions were doing this. Indiana, I'll call them out because they're sitting right here in front. Dynamic criterion mapping they used to get the sense of faculty about what was important, what was valuable in the learning, and they developed their own rubrics and things out of that. Doing it all within a state-mandated general education program. But they had the foresight and they actually had the ability to influence that legislation to not just have it be a set of courses that were required, but learning outcomes that were going to be required. And so it was again sort of not unique, but different way in how to move that into actual practice, with all institutions being able to see themselves playing a role in it. Again, another tuning approach happened in biology. Civic engagement was one of the outcomes that was looked at. And what it engendered was a whole lot of collaboration. A lot of what they found was that what they had been doing before with transfer was a sort of pro forma interaction, where they would just concentrate on, okay, we do this course, you take that course, we do this many credit, you do that then, and we'll do this, and they started actually collaborating around what was the kind of learning that needed to be happening. Were the students as prepared at the home institution as they were for the transfer students? And there were some surprising results where they found that, we were assuming that the transfer students were not as well prepared as the students that started at our institution. And what they found is that the transfer students were actually a little better prepared than their native students were. And so it said, okay, well, I guess maybe we should talk some more about what it is that we're doing and how it's going on. And indeed, some places started developing minors, new degree programs, competency-based programs. You've heard some about the Flex program and stuff. That there were all kinds of spillovers that occurred across different of these opportunities to collaborate. So essentially what we were being asked to do with the DQP was to shift from just looking at what happens on our campuses and in our classrooms from my work to our work. And especially when we're talking about transfer, it can no longer even be this is what our institution does and then we hand them off to somebody else, but rather we have to engage in this together because the students are our joint responsibility. We all have some role to play in this. We need to work on that. And that the assessment part of this needs to actually verify achievement, not just checking off that this thing was done, this course was taken, this many credits were achieved, but what was the level of achievement that we wanted? And that it should really be based upon the work that we're asking our students to do, that is their best work in terms of their own goals and their own investment in their own career and their own education, to be what we look at to say, are they achieving at a level that we would like? So now I'm going to turn it over to David to talk about what was happening at that dyad level in Salt Lake Community College. No. Not at the moment.
Okay. Well, good afternoon. For those of you who came in late, I just want to mention that early on, Terry made a quip about we have a panel of 4 white guys up here, and I just want to say that it's gratifying to me to know that when he thinks of white guys with a pulse, that I'm one of the top 3. So.
He has a very strong pulse.
So I should say a little bit of background. I'm the Director of General Education and ePortfolio at Salt Lake Community College. And I think I need to set the context a little bit in terms of Utah and where it's at in terms of higher education. So one thing you need to know about Utah is that there is only one large comprehensive community college in Utah, and Salt Lake Community College is it. So when you're talking about transfer initiatives, we're almost the only game in town. We do have some small community colleges. And we're also, geographically, if you know anything about Utah, it's mostly cattle ranches, national parks, and then a lot of people packed into one area. So we're close to most of our transfer institutions. About 60% of our transfer students go to the University of Utah, and the remaining 40% are split between Utah State University, Southern Utah, and so forth. Touching off something that Terry said earlier, our data indicates that our students are quite well prepared and do essentially indistinguishable from students who started at the four-year institutions in their juniors and senior years. And also Utah is something of an AAC&U laboratory.
It is.
We're involved in just about everything AAC&U does. We are a LEAP state. We're involved in quality collaboratives. We do a lot with signature work. We're in the multi-state collaborative. We're a small place with, 9 institutions of higher ed in public sector. So it's easy for us to sort of try things. We also have a long tradition of majors meetings where every year folks from every institution in a given major meet to discuss, the comings and goings of that major. As Director of General Education and also as someone who was on the state Gen Ed task force, I have not done the Quality Collaboratives work. I have facilitated the work that I'm describing today, so I'm in that sort of enviable position. And I just want to give 3 very quick case studies that sort of show the range of what can and has been done with Quality Collaboratives, and they are in the business school, education, and geosciences. With respect to the School of Business, our faculty worked with the faculty at the University of Utah's School of Business, and we only have a few common courses that students would take at Salt Lake Community College and at the University of Utah starting as freshmen and sophomore. They worked with those courses and they aligned learning outcomes to be common in those courses, and that's about as far as they got, frankly. They had they had a difficult time moving beyond that and aligning and creating common assessments. We had hoped that the University of Utah would use our ePortfolio system because Salt Lake Community College has an ePortfolio and it's being used in all of the lower division business courses. But that hasn't happened yet. So that's case study number 1, work in progress. In the education department at Salt Lake Community College has had a 2+2 agreement with University of Utah, and I think it's going on 15 or 16 years now. But as the faculty who is involved in this Quality Collaborative project mentioned, it was in, quote, dire need of revamping. And so they used the opportunity of the Quality Collaboratives to do just that. They wove DQP indicators into the teaching standards documents for the education programs, and they aligned student learning outcomes in all of the 5 courses that are shared between the University of Utah and Salt Lake Community College. And they used the ePortfolio in both institutions. So portfolios are fairly common in teacher education programs. The University of Utah kind of likes our students because they start their ePortfolio with us and then carry it on up to there. They redesigned the signature assignments that students need to do for their ePortfolio to better align them between the 2 institutions. And the faculty member who at Salt Lake Community College who did this work wanted me to remind you that Quality Collaboratives are successful when you combine two components. One is motivated faculty. So faculty need to buy into the Quality Collaboratives process, take it seriously, and work hard at it. And then also sustainable compensation, because it is quite a lot of work outside of their normal duties to do that. But she insists that the payback is considerable. If you would like additional information on this particular case study, you should contact Lois Osterreich directly, and I have her email there. Perhaps the most ambitious and most successful of our case studies is in Geosciences, where Adam Dastrup, the coordinator for our Geosciences department, restructured the Geography Associate of Science degree to better align with both national standards and transfer institutions. Using the DQP process, he discovered that the existing program needed more civic and global learning, and that this deficit was addressed by making changes in content and adding service learning components to the program. The program has become a strong adopter of our EPortfolio. So our EPortfolio started in general education and is now being adopted in various other academic programs, and Geosciences is one of them. All of the geoscience courses outside of Gen Ed use the ePortfolio, and they have a capstone course then that requires students to put together a final look at what they know and can do via the ePortfolio. And so now students who complete our program are able to seamlessly transfer to any of the institutions in Utah and are quite competitive when it comes to looking for scholarships, for instance. I understand that we're not hooked up to the internet, but if you're interested in this example, this website that Adam Dastrup put together does a remarkable job of showing step by step in each of the areas of DQP what he did and how he did it and who he worked with and what the payoffs have been. And it's just it's a very good example. So I would end by saying that I think, as a laboratory, Utah has yet again in the DQP process shown sort of the various ways that different disciplines can use the DQP to enhance transfer between community colleges and four-year institutions.
Great.
Thanks.
Also, any of you who are presenters, if you get us your slide decks and stuff, we will be posting those within the next couple weeks on our website. So you'll have access to all of these slides and stuff and the links and so on and so forth. So just a reminder, if you are presenting, please send us. We'll ask you for them, but please send them to us, and we'll post them for a resource as well. So, Tom.
Okay. Good. And thank you for coming today and joining us at the Quality Collaborative session. I'm Tom Steen, and I'm at the University of North Dakota, and I am part of a small leadership group of our North Dakota General Education Council. Terry mentioned that a little while ago. Teresa Tandy in the front row. Teresa, wave your hand. Teresa is the current president of that group, and we're part of the group of people that helped the North Dakota project move forward. So we'll tell you a little bit about that, and it's quite different, I think, in many ways from the one that David just showed you at Salt Lake City Community College and in Utah. The Quality Collaboratives project was really good for North Dakota higher education. It gave us a push. Belonging to the project gave us colleagues, which pushed us along, gave us kind of a support system, gave us deadlines as well, and that was important to us because our North Dakota Council is a real grassroots effort. It came about because faculty at all our colleges wanted to talk about general education and especially talk about the national movement in LEAP and other places that Terry alluded to, where we were looking at learning outcomes, looking at genuine learning in general education, and seeing what that would mean if we made moves away from course counting toward learning assessment, and what would that mean for us. Those conversations were going. That was the genesis of the council, and these conversations were on. The Quality Collaboratives came along at just the right time. We were recently a LEAP state, and then the Quality Collaboratives project came along and, as I said, served as a push for us. It also served to sharpen our aim. And in that sense, because the Quality Collaboratives was about transfer, we decided, of all the things we were talking about, to get serious about talking about transfer, and that led to kind of an element of strategy, which was our approach was going to be, let's look at our existing transfer document or transfer policy in the state. We have a very strong one. It's been in place for a long time. Strong in terms of efficiency. Strong in terms of smoothness of transfer of courses from one to another, and so on. Where it's not strong, of course, is its learning transfer. And so while courses may transfer, the learning doesn't always transfer. And of course, that's the big problem in transfer in general education. That was the North Dakota problem, sort of masked by the efficiency issue. So the strategy then really was triggered by being in the Quality Collaboratives. Along the way, we noticed that assessment learning was something we were going to have to do. There's a wide variability in assessment know-how across our various campuses. Terry showed you the list, 18 different campuses, some small tribal colleges with as few as 200 students, 2-year programs. In my own schools, 15,000 research institutions, doctoral programs. You put those two groups of institutions in the room together and you got a real different picture, right? But general education is the one thing all 18 of those institutions share, and that's why the council has its place. Coming together and building trust and sharing is key. So the quality part of the collaboratives for us had to do with zeroing in on learning. And we used the LEAP learning outcomes. As I said, we were a LEAP state, so that conversation had been taking place as we went. And what we got our heads around, what the council got its heads around by hosting a series of events, was helping everybody get on the same page with that idea that means demonstrated competency. That's an old idea for us here, but it was a big deal for people in North Dakota across that range of institutions to come to that sort of common sense. But at the same time, we were bound and determined to have each campus maintain its own uniqueness and its own mission. That's a particularly North Dakota thing, probably true in any state, I'm sure, but it was a big deal for us because that range of institutions was so broad. And so the idea of arriving at a common framework, I don't know if standards is the right word, but to do it without standardization was a key element. So that quality issue for us is a factor. The collaboration, once we came together, continued to come together, driven by the Quality Collaboratives project, kicked off with what kind of learning, and where we are right now ends up with number 4, kind of, well, what kind of learning exactly are we talking about, right? The learning outcomes were the first step, and we hit upon an idea, again, kind of a North Dakota idea for us, is that instead of having debates and votes over what are going to be the essential outcomes for the state, we sent everybody back to their own campus and said, which of the LEAP outcomes are really essential? The essentials, the ones that your campus would get around. And we came back and we then looked for the 100%ers, where the 100% consensus was, and that has become our North Dakota Gen Ed outcomes based on the LEAP learning, but also shared. As we talked and as we met, we could see we needed to have assessment, and that level will be up to campuses. So we'll have ongoing faculty development, assessment development. On assessments, campuses will share how they do their own assessments. What will be in common will be the outcomes. Everybody will use the same outcomes. And then lots of questions about, okay, so how's this thing going to work? And those questions have come back, and our council ends up talking those through, asking for input, and we've had several meetings, and the council has actually provided a way for those things to be tested and aired and have a conversation. Where we are now is trying to determine the proficiency levels of those learning. So the learning's agreed to. We're working on assessment practices, working on smoothing out the system, and then bringing people together now to set those proficiency levels, and that's where the DQP has come in for us. In fact, one of the biggest meetings we've had recently on these proficiency outcomes was the day or two after the second edition of the DQP came out. Timing was terrific. But the DQP has really been important because then we've had the conversations about where that bar is going to be set. For us in our state, we're zeroing in on the 2-year level because, again, that's what we share and that's what our original transfer policy is based on. So what we're really working on, our transfer policy, we call it GERDA, General Education Requirements Transfer Agreement. So we all just say GERDA, acronyms. The new policy is called GERDA Plus. We're maintaining some elements of the old courses, but the plus part, of course, is the learning and adding the learnings. Our registrars have been involved. It's not just faculty, and we've gone quite a ways down the path toward figuring out how to make it happen. What we haven't quite finished off is passing the policy. That's the problem with policy work, and then we're still dealing with how to make it all work. But we're pretty close at this point, and in fact, I think Teresa's going to lead us in an early vote in the spring or soon after. So that's kind of our story. The quality collaboratives have been really important for us because they sort of gave us a shot in the arm and also provided a structure, I think, for those conversations that were already going on, but the deadlines and the funding made it possible for us to bring people together, and as we said, using the DQP at the end. So,
Thank you.
My name's Ken O'Donnell. I work in California at the Chancellor's Office for the Cal State University System. And so that's 23 universities in a large and diverse state. We've got 391,000 undergraduate students, a surprising number of whom graduate eventually. And of those who graduate, about 60% start somewhere else, usually in the California community colleges. And so the observation that Tom just made about North Dakota, and that for them, the real sweet spot for the quality collaboratives was looking at that 2-year midpoint. What is the proficiency we're looking for at that moment? Because for us, that has real practical value. And the other frameworks that you get with the degree qualification profile, with tuning, with the various frameworks that are out there, at the 4-year level, at the master's level, they're also useful for us, especially for things like program review and accreditation. But when you're talking about actually influencing student behavior and directing policies that promote the best of what we believe in, it's at the 2-year mark, that moment of transfer, where we feel like we can get the most traction. I should also tell you, I'm really envious of my co-presenters, my fellow white guys with a pulse. The difference between, so Tom invited me to North Dakota a few years ago, and I was thrilled to be at that meeting when they did the count of the LEAP Essential Learning Outcomes and asked, where is the consensus in our state? And he said, we're going to get together all of the people who lead GE in the various institutions in North Dakota. So from my context, that sounds like, oh my God, that meeting must cost a fortune. What, did you rent a stadium? It was in a conference room, right? It was like, and as David was saying about Utah, you can make things happen in a laboratory like that. You can actually, you look around and people agree and then you go do it. Very, very different from my experience. And so when Terry was putting this panel together, he said, don't focus so much on what happened in individual quality collaboratives. We have excellent stories to share already from Utah and North Dakota. Instead, he said, from the California perspective, we would like to hear a little more on the big picture, the policy levers. In other words, the step where Tom just left off, that vote that's going to get called soon. And so I'm going to share with you something that sounds a little bit different from what you've been hearing. But before I go into that, I just want you to say that that laboratory effect, what I saw when I went to North Dakota, what I've been learning from working with other states, is something we've been trying to encourage in California by focusing on smaller geographical footprints, promoting partnerships between state universities and their surrounding feeder community colleges, and getting back to the place where the decision makers really can fit into a conference room and solve problems together, and then report back to the rest of the state on what they learned, so that in the system office we can act more like what Terry said about the AAC&U and just reflect back what we're hearing from the field. So the structures that we have, those admin structures that lend themselves to creative policy improvement in California, were designed with this kind of instruction in mind. It's just not a great legacy. But there is one tool in it, one little piece that I'm going to share with you because it turned out to be so valuable with quality collaboratives. And that was devised decades ago, and it's called GE certification. And what it means is that at the time the student at the community college is taking a bunch of courses that are labeled, guaranteed to count toward general education requirements in the CSU, they know as they go along what's going to fit in which of our slots. And then the community college is authorized to say when the student transfers, this one's done with all the lower division GE. It's just a checkbox that shows up in the degree audit. Now, the checkbox has been defined as a collection of courses in discrete areas of general education tracked by credit hour. But it's just a checkbox. We can define it however we want. We can say for the student at the moment of transfer, you're done with lower division GE, not because we reviewed your transcript and we found that list, but on some other basis. And it'll still work in the degree audit. It'll still count as lower division GE certification. So that's the tool, that's the star to which we have hitched our wagon. In 2008, a while ago, the faculty, largely CSU faculty, but there are some staff and administrators on this committee, got together and reviewed our statewide big honking policy document, the Executive Order on General Education and Breadth Requirements in the CSU. These are the sections in it. It's in 6 articles. They mostly rearranged it, reviewed it, updated some of the diction, some of the verbiage. There was one significant change, though, that was made that year, and it had to do with Article 3 premises. The premises had always said laudable, lofty things about what we expect students to know. But in this case, as of this update, they also added an explicit citation of the LEAP essential learning outcomes. And in fact, you can see in a page of that executive order, they're paraphrased. It's actually cited, and there's the paraphrase, and you guys, I'm sure, know these 4, but it's content knowledge, knowing stuff. Still have to remember things. I don't care if you can always look it up on your phone. Intellectual and practical skills like writing, communication, problem solving, working in teams, that kind of thing. Connecting to the world, personal and social responsibility, actually applying your learning in ways that are moral, ethical. By and large, degree holders are the ones who will be calling the shots later. We want them doing so well. And then finally, my favorite, the integrative learning, that you can recombine this stuff and continue to learn on the fly long after you've left our company. What our faculty decided in 2008 was, that's a better list. So then the question becomes, could we create a system where students know this list at the community colleges and also understand this is what they're trying to get to at the moment of transfer? And then they get that box checked in the degree audit. And then along the way at the community colleges, they take their courses and do co-curriculars and do campus-based employment, whatever it is. They track emerging proficiencies, as you heard David describing in Salt Lake City, in an EPortfolio. And then when they're ready, our faculty will have talked to each other enough between the community colleges and the state universities that we can all agree that means they're certified. You get your box checked. Come on in. That was essentially where the thinking left off. This is echoing Tom now. So what we needed from quality collaboratives was some money, some deadlines, some concrete oomph behind it. I think the goals were pretty clearly in place, but the idea that we could get some national external attention and focus that on this question right here, this very narrow question, was what gave us the boost we needed. And it also, because it was around transfer and bringing faculty together, it also generated a whole lot of other good ideas that don't particularly have to do with quality collaboratives. It's just what happens when you put smart people in a room together. So the value rubrics were sort of the granddaddy of all of this. They were the progenitor, and I really do have to thank Terry as long as I'm standing next to you. That is the gift, man, that keeps on giving.
This is why I asked Ken to be here.
And then, the degree qualification profile obviously helps too. Getting that international imprimatur on what it is that you're doing has been helpful for us. And so that's how the quality collaboratives unfolded in California. And it's also where we see it ending up from that policy level, that sort of vague question of, when you're done, what do you do with it? We think that's our answer. We think that's what we'll be doing with it when we're done. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. And I may invite Ken to say a couple words more about part of the answer to that little specific question that emerged out of the Northridge Pierce Community College dyad, and how it is spreading across the systems in California. But I wanted to also just finish this part of it with, we do have 2 publications that will be emerging from this project that have a lot more of the lessons we've learned and a lot more of the examples from those the work of the campuses themselves. One that's going to focus primarily, for those of you who are in more administrative roles perhaps, on the policy implications of this and ways in which we found the DQP to be useful or not in terms of influencing the policies around transfer at a state level as well as at a local level, campus level. And in a second volume that is focusing more explicitly on the assessment, faculty leadership parts of those 2 strands of this work, because what emerged is that the assessment and the faculty leadership were intertwined if it was going to be successful and produce information that was going to be useful for faculty and for the systems there to be able to use the DQP and its focus on learning competence as a transfer tool. Would you like to hear a little bit about how the Northridge Pierce worked out an answer to this in terms of your pathways? Let's do that briefly, and then we can open it up for questions.
Happy to. So some of you have heard at other presentations at this conference about the thematic links across different GE courses that we're testing in California. Our chancellor made a reference to it yesterday or the day before, and it also was highlighted in an earlier session today. Northridge and Pierce went into the quality collaboratives with a shared focus on LEAP outcomes, which has spread to other community colleges in California. Their Senate has embraced those outcomes the same way ours did. And I know there are friends of mine from California community colleges in the room who are also working on such things. Along the way, though, they also came across the pathways work that had begun at CSU Chico around integrating in interdisciplinary pressing real-world problems like food security, cybersecurity, social justice, globalization, things that they sometimes get called wicked problems, which is a very New England phrase, but we've adopted it in California. Now that's what we call them. I think we're getting to the point now where the whole state will be looking at collections of those courses really to satisfy GE, but if you collect them all in that theme, then it'll earn you a minor after transfer. And that little incentive seems to be enough for the students to take on the extra inconvenience of scheduling not only the course that satisfies GE and fits their schedule, but also links to other GE courses. We were concerned about the financial sustainability of the model, but really the students sort of make it work. The piece that's going to take a little bit of money is on the faculty development side, as Terry just alluded to. To sustain these things and make them really work, you need ongoing conversation among faculty. They don't just create it and walk away, or we'll just end up with another version of the sterile mess we inherited.
Great, thank you. How about questions? us a quick yeah, please. Tell us who you are.
Dave Reinhold from Western Michigan University. I'd like to add, Ken mentioned the fact that in California they're a little more complicated than North Dakota and Utah. I'd like to add another factor to that in Michigan, and that is we have 26 community colleges, 15 public institutions, complete autonomy. And so you've got 41 cats in the state running in all different directions. And so we've started to address that by thinking about applying as a leap state. So we've got most of those 15 cats in the 4 years talking together now. But the problem we have is transfer, because there's no real communication. The state has come up with a brand new transfer agreement, which is really antiquated when it started because it's based upon check boxes and credit hours. So my question to you is, if you were in Michigan and trying to do what you're doing here, what lessons from what you've done in this project could you tell us that might help us to get started?
Very good question. Ken, you want to answer that?
It's great. We agreed before the panel began how exactly we were going to pass the buck when hard questions came up. So thanks. In one sense, the fragmented nature, the independent nature of the institutions that you were just describing is a plus, believe it or not. I mean, we could use a few more hinges in the machinery in California. Sometimes the fact that we all have to lurch at once is a drawback. In your place, I think one of the first things I would do is look to create something low stakes and quasi-unofficial in the way of a statewide club among faculty who care about general education. I think that's the approach closest to what Tom did, because they're not all publics in your group.
No.
It was kind of, and you guys do that too. You've got that educated citizen Utah thing.
Educated person.
Educated person. Educated person. Whether citizen or not. And if you could keep it at that, if you could pull it off, right? If you could do it without all the provosts get together and agree they want to do it or something like that, so that it's kind of below the radar, then you could get the group to develop expressions of learning and student proficiency that it cares about before asking the articulation officers and people like myself to figure out how to operationalize it.
And sitting right in front of you is a guy from Virginia who they took a different approach where their assessment directors on different campuses got together and formed their own group. And it actually ended up becoming more formalized. They now have an annual meetings, much like Educated Person, and really started driving more collaborative things among institutions that were indeed quite independent and wanted to protect their independence and their autonomy. But they did find this was a way for them to start to collaborate that then started to mushroom from that.
Our very first meeting in North Dakota came about because a couple of institutions had made changes on their campus, which is how Gen Ed works a lot of times, right? And questions came. About, well, will our students be able to transfer in? Or what are you doing? What did you do? So our first meeting was let's all talk about our Gen Ed programs, and we asked every single school. Now, you would have trouble with that number, but we asked every single school to do a poster session on their Gen Ed program. How's it laid out? Who organizes it? And then something like, what are the one or two of the biggest problems that you have? And so it was about sharing that first time, and as you would guess, there was a lot of things we didn't know about each other's Gen Ed programs. But that was really where our council was formed right there. And then we stole from Utah the idea of holding these once or twice a year summits. We didn't do it on the educated person or citizen. But we did them on major issues in general education. But that did exactly what Ken said. It was a gathering without pressure. It was a gathering, but there was slight pressure in the sense that somebody had developed some programs, some changes, and other people wanted to know about it. Some people didn't want to get left behind. Other people just wanted to know. So that might have some potential for you.
Anyone else? Question, comment? ideas. Yeah.
What is the general pulse or discussion with colleges and universities and other sectors, whether it's the UC system or any other sort of parts of the higher ed landscape, to join you in these endeavors?
Good question, and if you didn't hear it in the back, it was what about some other sectors? California's got, we count 4, it depends on how you divvy them up, but we've got the community colleges, the CSU where I work, there's the more selective UC system, which includes Berkeley, UCLA, 8 others, and then there's the privates, right? There's all of some of them very prestigious, some of them are more 2-year vocationally oriented. All of them have a role to play in educating the state, so where are they in this kind of work? The good news is they all come in with essentially the same check mark in that degree audit, that crappy GE requirement curriculum that we created decades ago. It really caught on like the plague. And so now the privates recognize it. The 2 years, the 4 years, the UC certainly has a version of that called IGETSI, kind of like your Gerda. And so the means are there. The interest is there in UC in an office called UC Curriculum Integration, which is right now a tiny shop. It's like 3 people. I'm not entirely sure everyone in the UC Office of the President even knows they're there. But they work with us a lot on these little innovative, below-the-radar projects. And then the privates are also following, especially in California, Brandman University. They advertise a lot. A lot of people think they're for-profit, and they're actually non-profit. They're an offshoot of Chapman University. Some of their folks are here, too, and have done cutting-edge work in student outcomes assessment, which is critical to deploying something like quality collaboratives. So they are in the game, although the means of policy are sometimes one removed.
And it's also the case that the assessment directors in the UC system are stumbling toward some kind of collaboration around what might be done from that arena again. So it's kind of like Virginia, that they're seeing that the assessment part of it is going to be key to this, and so they haven't figured out how to do it yet, or even how to talk to each other well about it. But they're moving in that direction. Yeah, here, and then we'll go back to Charlotte. Okay, yeah.
So in Idaho, we're figuring out how to speak as a state. Some of you have heard our story. And so we're doing pretty well with our statewide transfer. What's coming up for us is a lot of our students are transferring from across the country. And while I'm finding, as I look at courses from across the country, a growing number of institutions referencing LEAP outcomes, is there any work being done nationally to try and provide something for us to use to move beyond just our statewide transfer? The kind of thematic work nationally that we could say to our registrars and to our faculty and to our assessment groups, this can transfer. We can count on that faculty having done its diligence.
I can talk about the interstate passport.
Yeah, please do. Yeah. One of the more promising things.
We're also part of a project through WICHE, Western Interstates. I forget exactly what the acronym is, but it's about 18 of the Western states. And WICHE is developing an interstate general education passport for state to state or between states transferring on general education. Same ideas, same thing, except that it's between states. There are 6 states involved. If you look on the WICHE website, it's called Interstate Passport. You'll find a good bit of background. It's in its second phase, grant funded by Lumina and the Gates Foundation. And the other states include California, Oregon, Hawaii, Wyoming, Utah, and North Dakota, I think right now. I may be missing one or so right there. And that group is working out the mechanics of it, including registrars, institutional research people, assessment people, and actually looking at marketing people next year, bringing it in as something the institutions can actually use as a selling point, knowing that there is going to be more and more transfer transfer going on. So that's an interesting project.
And Witchy is W-I-C-H-E, if you Google it. Okay? Well, we're officially out of time, but Charlotte, I said I would take your question.
Okay, it isn't a question, it's just a comment. That
Okay.
I'm very sure we're out of time. In Massachusetts, the emphasis, the prime advantage of the quality collaboratives was in faculty development. Faculty came together in interdisciplinary groups, and were very excited in talking about how they taught their classes. They didn't know they were talking about assessment. They didn't know they were talking about general education. They didn't know they were talking about central learning outcomes, but they were having a wonderful time, and there were real benefits to the pedagogy. As a consequence, the policy has shifted to developing similar pathways for programs in economics, psychology, and for other disciplines. And that's the way the project went.
Great.
The transfer will be improved, but in programmatic pathways.
Thank you. And again, it's partly the richness of what we discovered through this sort of broad-based, multiple ways into and around this conversation about what we're learning. So thank you all very much. Please join me in thanking our panel.
That's right.